Good day and welcome to Psych Sense, where we make sense of mental health. I'm Ken Mallon, your host, and today we're talking about the controversial topic racism. Now firstly, what is racism? Now there are many definitions, so no matter which one I choose, it's likely to be unsatisfactory for some people, especially coming from a 52-year-old white man. But I'll define it this way. A person is a racist if they have general beliefs about people belonging to one or more racial or ethnic groups that causes them to behave differently towards those groups than they would toward other groups. Now, some people will say it's not racist if these beliefs that they have are unconscious versus if they're conscious. And some people will say that it's only racist if the differential behaviors they exhibit cause harm. Now, personally, I make neither of those distinctions. I don't really care if it's conscious or unconscious, and the degree to which it causes harm kind of gets argumentative. So how does this relate to mental health? Well, there's a lot of mental health conditions that involve incorrect or adverse perceptions that lead to negative behaviors. And those get treated, so could it be possible that racism could be treated? Think, for example, about eating disorders. So you think you're overweight, so you restrict your diet. There's also delusional disorders. You think you're the king and you're above the law. And there's even things like PTSD or antisocial personality disorder, which can sometimes have associated violent or aggressive behavior. Now, why do we even want to consider racism to be a mental disorder? Well, there could be some advantages. One advantage to classifying something in this way is that it could lead to increases in psychological research and treatments for racism. That's right, I just said treatments. Listen further, there may actually be some ways to treat this. And as more people become eligible for mental health services, the stigma associated with mental health and psychotherapy declines. So those are just some of the benefits of trying to classify racism as a mental health disorder. Now, there is potential that we could actually decrease racism over time through therapy. Now, before we get into whether or not racism should be considered a mental health issue, let's just assume for the moment that it is. Let's assume that it's in the DSM-5 manual and that it has its own chapter in here right next to maybe depression or anxiety or other mental illnesses. Now, you might argue that racism should not be a diagnosable illness because that would lead to an increase in tolerance of racism, and we certainly don't want that. Well, I'm trying to tell you that just because something is classified as a mental illness doesn't mean there's necessarily tolerance. It is a good point, but let's talk for a moment about other sources of violence and negative behaviors in our society that we have connected to mental illness. Now, previously I mentioned schizophrenia, antisocial personality disorder, and PTSD, conditions that sometimes have negative behaviors that impact others. Now, combat veterans who have PTSD sometimes behave violently and can be abusive toward their spouses and children, yet we're very sympathetic towards them. We're sympathetic because we know that they've suffered in battle. Now, in situations where PTSD sufferers behave badly, we do hold veterans responsible for their behavior, but we also treat their behavior. Since PTSD is a diagnosable mental illness, we're open to both sides of the coin. Holding people responsible for behaviors, but also treating the underlying condition has resulted in war-related PTSD being deeply studied, and therapists are well trained, and treatments are readily available. Now, what I just described for PTSD, wouldn't that be a great outcome for racism? What if psychological treatments for racism were studied, therapists were trained, and treatments were readily available for racism? So how would racism actually be treated? Well, we know that racism is due to incorrect beliefs, and we do have in this manual other conditions that result from incorrect beliefs. Examples include delusional disorder, eating disorder, social anxiety, and quite a few other conditions. And we have treatments for such conditions. Now, you might argue that if someone's racist, they're always going to be racist, and I think we all know racist people, but I've witnessed people who are racist gradually become less racist over time. Now, how is this done? It's typically done by being exposed to information and experiences that debunk deep-seated beliefs. And as we know, it doesn't happen just by saying to somebody, hey, you're wrong, you're a racist, and so on and so forth. Typically, that just causes people to put up more and more barriers and fight back. Now, in terms of being exposed to information and experiences that change one's beliefs, in psychology, we refer to this as exposure therapy combined with psychoeducation. And it's used for things like phobia, social anxiety, things where people have false beliefs, often fears, that are laid to rest via this exposure and education. Now, I also mentioned delusional disorder. At a high level, the DSM discusses delusions as fixed beliefs that are not amenable to change in light of conflicting evidence. And this sounds a lot like racism. So one could certainly bucket racism as a type of delusional disorder. And delusions are commonly treated with medications and psychotherapy. In the case of racism, I doubt that medication would play much of a role because racist notions are societal and not due to brain chemical issues. However, I do think psychoeducational and psychoanalytical approaches could be effective. So techniques can be applied to help racist people become more self-aware, recognize their incorrect thought process, and cut them off at the pass before they manifest themselves into unhealthy behaviors. Now, typically, psychoeducation must first be applied to help the person understand why their beliefs are not correct, or at least be open to that possibility. There's a type of psychotherapy known as cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which teaches techniques for short-circuiting incorrect thoughts and perceptions before they lead to bad behaviors. Now, I'm sure you're all probably saying, this sounds great. It looks like there's a treatment. It looks like it could potentially be diagnosed. It fits in with some other things that are in this book. But the fact of the matter is that racist people don't want to be cured. They don't think that they're sick. They are either happy being racist or they're in denial about it, and they aren't going to voluntarily show up for therapy. Now, these are very good points. So what we can do is we can look at and see if there are other situations like this that are successfully treated. So you got to ask yourself, how do we currently deal with mental illnesses in which the person doesn't want to be treated or they don't accept that they have a problem? Well, in our good old DSM, there are many such cases that are handled by the mental health community today. They include, for example, the personality disorders, which includes things like narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, commonly referred to as sociopaths or psychopaths. There's also personality disorders such as borderline personality disorder and a host of others in which the person either doesn't want to be treated or they don't realize they have a problem. Now, in these cases, there are two ways that the person enters psychotherapy. One way is that family members insist that they go. Typically, this would be a concerned spouse, but could also be a parent, a sibling, or another close friend or family member. The other scenario is when the person has another condition, such as depression or anxiety. This is a situation where you see someone with antisocial personality disorder. Maybe they're a criminal or something like that, but they're going to see a therapist because they have depression or anxiety, and through that therapy, this other problem gets resolved. Now, everything I've said so far in this video about racism could also be applied more generally to all sorts of bigotry, where we're talking about race, gender identity, gender preference, disabilities, or other minority or underrepresented groups. So maybe bigotry in general could be thought of as a delusional disorder, and maybe it could be treated similar to the way other mental health issues that involve misperceptions are also treated through psychoeducation and cognitive behavioral therapy. So I have a couple of requests, and the only way this is really going to work is that if both families and also the therapy community tries to help out. First, to family members of people who are racist or otherwise practicing bigotry, try to encourage that person in your life to talk to a therapist. Instead of fighting with them over topics around racism, maybe just try to encourage them to talk to a therapist. Now, you might say, well, what kind of angle can I use? Well, one possible angle could be anger management. I mean, some people that are racist or bigoted sometimes get angry over this, and you could maybe encourage them, hey, I'm your spouse, why don't you go get some therapy to help you with anger? Or maybe just for your general psychological well-being, you could say, gosh, you seem to be getting upset a lot. Do you want to talk to a therapist about that? Now, this isn't going to help if the mental health professional and the mental health community in general doesn't also recognize this as a problem. So to the mental health professionals, I would say that if someone enters your practice for whatever underlying condition they have to be treated, you might want to just go ahead and assess whether or not you think that they are bigoted and whether or not they are racist. This could be thought of as an adjustment disorder. You could think of this as a delusion. However tact you want to take, you might be able to make some changes there as well. So together, through community and through mental health professionals, I think we might be able to make a dent in widespread racism and bigotry. So with that, thank you for watching Psych Sense, where we make sense of mental health. I'm Ken Mallon, your host, and I'll see you next time.